So before I was so rudely interrupted, I began talking about the cascade and the neurological cascade and neurological correlates. And this diagram shows the retina and it shows the basic cellular structure of the retina. And what I want to do, and I talked about different activations and deactivations, the different types of processing that happen at the various anatomic locations at which consciousness occurs. So we know, for example, the retina. I previously mentioned a level of processing that happens. I want to say a little bit more about it. Um, Basically, what the retina does is it allows, it eliminates information about light intensity, emphasizes local contours, and it compresses the raw data, the raw photon, in it translates that via a morphological change in a chemical from cis to trans form. It changes that to a neuronal signal and sends that to different areas of the brain. Here's the basic anatomical structure of the visual processing cascade. Yes, so there is a level of processing that happens here. This is the V1, the V1 ventral area. So there is a sort of a hierarchical level of processing. So there's this phenomena of flashbulb attention or selective attention that the V1 area is involved in. So the V1 is able to, so the V1 has fibers. So I have a diagram over here that talks about association fibers. So your thalamus and is able to broadcast an image to the V1 area, and the V1 area is able to broadcast its information to prefrontal areas, and there's there's a bias and there's a change depending on attention, memory, context, and reward. So it makes sense that if you have a saber-toothed tiger behind you, that there would be it would behoove you to pay more attention to that and filter out and de-emphasize other less important sensory stimuli. And we find that our V1 area is able to do that. So in terms of auditory association, there's of course the auditory area and inferior colliculus and superior olivary complex, and these different areas that receive information from the thalamus and are variously involved in processing. So your auditory cortex has fibers that communicate to your Wernicke's area, where we're able to recognize speech, and of course with visual correlation, there's there's areas that recognize faces, and there's all these specialized areas of the brain that have different different levels of involvement with our experience of consciousness and different types of conscious processing. And where I relate this to intentionality and back to this definition that this core question I posed at the beginning is this idea that it relates to the evidence from plasticity. I previously mentioned the work of Terry Strong. Terry Strong wrote a dissertation about neuroplastic possibilities for expanded consciousness, where she talks about her recovery from temporal lobe epilepsy. And there's a number of other resources that support strength of plasticity. In my work, how I relate this is I talk about Hebb's postulate, or the Hebbian synapse. So there's this principle in neuroscience which says that neurons that fire together are able to wire together. And I modify Hebb's postulate. And the way that I rephrase it is in the following way. And I say, when a neural correlate of our directed thoughts brings the axon of cell A near enough to excite cell B, or repeatedly or consistently takes part in firing it, some growth or metabolic change takes place in one or both cells, such that A's efficiency as one of the cells B firing is increased. A correlated propensity to return to the same set of thoughts that brought about this intentionally induced change in neurometabolic processes accompanies these new axonal branches. So basically, it's just saying that if you intentionally direct your thoughts, that is going to cause new axons to be created. It's going to cause brain regions to communicate in new ways, in new and more powerful ways. And the way, so things like the way transcription occurs and the way neurons communicate, that's going to be changed by by intentional thinking. So this brings me back to this idea of intentionality. Intentionality is it's a really strong term, and it's central to a lot of what I have to say. So Searle, who's a prominent philosopher in this field, he talks about his definition is that it's a general term for the various forms by which the mind can be directed at or be about or of objects or states of affairs in the world, and that's a very weak definition. There's a root of it that came far before Searle from the Latin intentio or intendere, which means to stretch forth. So it was this idea that it came from Thomas Aquinas, and he talks about how our intellectual apparatus, or what I call the socio-emotional intellectual apparatus, it has the ability to stretch and bring objects into itself, and it has a sort of I describe the mind in my writing as having strong properties of elasticity, and that relates back to the Hebbian idea of collateral axons. So so I really want to impress this idea that intentionality is really about stretching and elasticity, and that's really what the Latin root of the word means. Intentio in Latin means to stretch forth. So that's really a key concept to keep in mind. So moving along, I want to begin the discussion of the psychological theoretical orientation that is primary to this work, and that's the position of existential theory. So existential theory deals with core crises, and it is inclusive of the work of Jaspers and Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Searle and Heidegger. And this diagram shows, hopefully you can see it here, it shows the distinction between metaphysics and ontology that's implicit in the writings of different existential thinkers. So within existential thought, here's the core crises that we've all heard of. This idea of being versus nothingness, isolation versus connection, death versus striving for life, meaning versus meaninglessness. So these are all universal human conditions, universal human problems. So the division between these two theorists relative to metaphysics versus ontology, the perspective that I'm going to support in my writing is more so it's an atheistic ontological perspective as opposed to a metaphysical perspective. So this diagram shows the competing camps between sort of Kierkegaard and Heidegger. Kierkegaard talks about levels of existence and the aesthetic and the ethical and the religious layers. So it's this idea that these different paradoxes that are a inherent part of human experience and therefore an inherent part of our conscious experience. These are going to sculpt and dictate the sorts of thoughts that we return to. The being nothingness paradox is going to change and dictate consciousness in that it will make us aware of mortality. So as we witness people's death, of course, I saw a very close friend of mine pass away, and when that happened, I was in a approximately week-long period where death was a unavoidable thought that I returned to day in and day out for about a week-long period. It was the only thought that I could return to because I was obsessed and mourning and all that stuff. And when these things happen, they dictate the contents of our mind in a predictable, in sort of a lawful and strong way. Regarding this paradox, Kierkegaard talks about the dizziness of freedom. It's this idea that we're absolutely free to direct our lives in any way that we wish. And so I, of course, am respectful of religious and spiritual viewpoints, but my own opinion does not allow for that. So again, the ontological perspective. Ontology is basically the study of being. It's the study of creating a solid and durable sense of who we are. And the question is it necessary to make that arbitrary leap of faith that I alluded to? Is that a necessary piece, or do we have to leap into the metaphysical or into the woo-woo realm? Is that necessary? The reason I have a preference for the atheistic realm is that it supports our intention and our power to direct our lives. The idea of, so it's related to development of the self, and here is the relationship that Heidegger discusses. I'm going to try to do this piece in 2 minutes. So it's not so much about trying to reach the theological realm. It's about how do we come into being. And I want to spend some time with this quote. And it says, "Thinking is of being, in so much as thinking, propitiated or sign of my being, belongs to being. Thinking is of being, insofar as thinking, belonging to being, listens to being." So I have this stepwise progression from your thoughts to your being, to your humanitas, to your existence. So Heidegger talks about homo humanus versus homo barbarus, and this is not in the more contemporary sense of humanism, not in the Abraham Maslow sense of humanism, but more in the humanistic sense, and humanistic in their sort of Greco-Roman idea of being civilized. So basically what this quote says is that our thoughts ought to be directed in a way that it assists with our development of ontological security. So put another way, your thinking should allow your sense of self, or your ontological sense of self, it should allow that to develop in a useful way.